What's up? Felix here. I'm here with the one and only Max Ravitz from Moog Music, and he brought a new Moog Studio bundle. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I already checked out in one of my videos the Moog Studio bundle, I think with the Mother-32 and the DFam.
Yeah.
And why don't you go ahead and tell me what you have here today?
Well, so this is our new Moog Sound Studio with the Subharmonicon, Mother-32, and DFam. Mm-hmm. And the engineer who designed these instruments, Steve Dunnington, when he started with the Mother-32, had a plan to kind of keep going, and I think this is his grand vision, where you have an instrument that's able to give you percussive focus sounds, which the DFam does, an instrument that does more traditional synthesizer bass and lead lines, which is the Mother-32, and then something a little bit more experimental in the Subharmonicon that can provide chordal material, but also just some less traditional Moog sounds, even though it does sound like a Moog, but...
So the special thing about the Subharmonicon is that you can create subharmonic sounds with the subharmonic oscillators, and this is like a little bit outside of the realm of normal harmony. So now I'm thinking it might be a bit of a challenge that might have some interesting results in the end to actually combine the Mother-32 and the Subharmonicon, right?
Yeah, you know, it's because of the way that they work. Essentially, both sub-oscillators, typically a sub-oscillator will be placed an octave or 2 octaves below the frequency of the oscillator. These actually have divide-down circuits that allow us to go, you know, the oscillator frequency divided by 2, divided by 3, divided by 4, all the way down to 16. But because they're precise mathematical equations for how those frequencies are generated, it starts falling outside of normal chromatic harmony and more into just intonation.
Yeah, so you have sounds that sound somewhat like a bass sound, but also like a chord, but also outside of irregular 12-tone equal tempo.
Tonality and harmony, exactly.
Actually, also on our channel, we have an in-depth video on just the Subharmonicon. It's like 20-minute, a bit more in-depth demo. But yeah, I think the Subharmonicon, what I really liked about it is that it actually takes a bit longer to come up with a sound that you really like, as it was on one of these, for example. But when you have it, it's a sound that you would never have created with anything else because of this polyrhythmic idea and this subharmonic idea, which is like you don't really find implemented in any other piece of gear as far as I know.
Yeah, definitely your approach to harmony on the Subharmonicon is guided into sort of a different space. I like to think of it as a happy accident machine, because I usually arrive at something that I find interesting, but I didn't intend to go there when I was starting.
Yeah, and I think it really makes most fun when you approach it like that and when you don't expect the regular harmony that you're used to.
Absolutely. And then, the Mother-32 is a very traditional subtractive voice with a single oscillator, a filter, LFO, and an ASR envelope. And then you have a 32-step sequencer that's pretty capable, and a few fun features in the patch bay, like a mult and an assignable output that can be configured to do all sorts of different things, like spit out clock or divisions of the clock or modulation signals.
And then it's actually super practical, especially when you consider that they're all in the same row. It now makes even more sense that you would just arrange the whole patch bay in one space. Whereas on, for example, the grandmother and matriarch, you have the individual patch points basically where they are being derived from. But
it also is nice because it can keep the cables out of the way from the knobs, so you can clearly see the face and all the controls.
So why don't we go ahead and you show me around how you would approach creating a patch. Basically from scratch right now, and maybe go through the rationale behind it.
So the first thing that I'm going to do is wire sync between all of the units. I'm going to use the Subharmonicon as our lead clock. So I'm going to take the clock output in the patch bay, and I'm going to feed it down to the DFam, to the advanced clock input. And then I'm going to take the trigger output from the DFam and feed that back into the tempo input on the Mother-32.
Now this is our master clock, basically.
And so what I'm going to, now that I have sync wired up, I'm going to start with generating a nice melody and pattern on the Subharmonicon. And the way that I usually do that is before I play, I can use the trigger button. And then I'll be able to hear the harmonies on the steps. So I'm going to assign sequencer 1 to control oscillator 1, and sequencer 2 to control oscillator 2.
Yeah.
And that's also going to control the sub-oscillator. So all three of these will be moving in parallel according to these two sequencers.
Cool.
And so to start, I'm going to set one rhythm to control both of the sequencers so that when I hit the next button, I can cycle through and hear how they all sound together. And what I can do is hold this EG button down so that they drone. And then go through and set my harmonies per step.
Yeah.
And so from there, I can add sub-oscillators.
And as we can hear, there's actually the quantization of the pitches of the oscillator.
Yeah, so you'll hear that's divide by 2, divide by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way down to 16.
Makes sense.
And so, yeah, now I can hear how those harmonies work on that.
Yeah.
And so now that I hear that, I maybe want to adjust and get some different intervals. And now what I can do is assign a different clock rate to channel 2, and I can hear how the different steps will relate as they step through to make sure I don't hear any harmonies that I don't like.
Okay. So now we basically have a polymeter because this one is going through every step and this one is just...
Yeah, exactly. And you'll actually be able to do proper polyrhythms inside of it as well.
Yeah.
But so now that I've set up my harmonies, I'm going to set up a rhythm that I like. And what I'm going to do is set rhythm 1 to control sequencer 1 and have that move at the slowest setting. And an interesting thing is that these polyrhythms are actually the same as the sub-frequencies, the sub-oscillators, and they work the same where the tempo is my oscillator, and these can divide up to 16 times against the tempo.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and hit play here. And I'll be able to adjust these rhythms to get the movement. One thing that you'll notice is the voice is paraphonic. So it doesn't matter which sequencer moves, I'll be able to hear all 6 oscillators play at once. And then I can change the waveforms. I can set different ranges for the range of the sequencers if I want to. I'm going to keep it on 1 octave for now, but then I can also switch it into just intonation and hear the differences between equal temperament and just intonation. And then I can go fully unquantized as well, which we hear a lot of dissonance introduced.
What I really like about this approach to the rhythm is that you have patterns that make sense and it never feels off, but you also cannot really say where the starting point is and where the end is, and that always has some sort of hypnotizing effect in a way.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
You can dive in at any point, but there's no way out really, and it just has a soothing, hypnotizing effect. Which I really like.
It can be very nice and hypnotizing.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing is the envelopes work in a slightly unique way where if you set an attack stage and there's another trigger that gets introduced while it's going through its attack stage, it will ignore it and wait until it reaches the top setting before listening to another trigger.
Okay. I see, yeah.
So you can get some nice dynamic movement within your sounds. So now that I have that set up on the Subharmonicon, I'm going to move to the Mother-32 and write a quick sequence. Because I've chosen this scale, I know that I'm playing essentially in C, so I can just write a sequence avoiding the black notes, and I'll be able to harmonize well.
Yeah.
So to do this, I'm actually going to pull the tempo knob out, and I'm going to reset a sequence. I'm just going to do a simple kind of bass pattern.
Yeah.
And so now that I've done that, I'm going to turn the DFam down, and I'm going to let them all run together. And I've armed it for external sync. I'm going to hit stop on the Subharmonicon and reset it. And then I'm going to turn the run stop button on the DFam while I'm waiting on step 8. And so now when I hit play on the Subharmonicon, everything will play together. Transpose it down. So I can get nice sort of deep basses and I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to set the assignable output on the Mother-32 to I'll hit stop, to be a stepped random output. So it's going to give me a randomized frequency that will change on every single step of the sequencer.
Yeah.
And I'm going to patch that into the mults on the panel, which allows me to get 2 copies of that same signal. And then I'm going to patch 1 copy of that into this mix 2 input, which is addressing this VC mix knob. And this allows you to do a bunch of fun things like use it as a crossfader between 2 signals. You can use it as a VCA if you only feed 1 signal into one side and then use the VC mix control. Or you could use it to attenuate a signal, which is what I'm going to be doing here.
Okay.
So then I can take my VC mix output and I'm going to feed it to the cutoff input on the Subharmonicon. So now, if I reset and we listen again, you'll notice that I can make the Subharmonicon's filter randomly open and close, which will give us some nice movement in the signal. And then if I turn this up, and what's nice is we're getting 16th note movement from the Mother-32, which gives us an additional rhythmic subdivision of movement on the Subharmonicon.
Yeah, so we have a basically polymeter of 3 rhythms right now.
Yeah. And so now another thing that I can do is if I go into step mode, I can see the steps that I have programmed and I can add some rests. And so now I can make a little bit of a pattern for myself. Just something a little bit more rhythmic than straight 16th notes to play against this pattern. And so now that I have done that, I'm going to just focus on the DFam for a moment. So the DFam gives you 2 oscillators and 3 envelopes and all sorts of fun things that you can do to route them against each other and make numerous types of rhythmic and percussion-focused sounds. And then you have 2 rows of a sequencer, one that's controlling pitch that can be routed to 1 oscillator. Both oscillators are just used to sequence something externally. And then you have a row here that just contributes to velocity. And so the velocity will control the envelopes for all 3 of, or the amplitude for the envelopes for all 3 sections. So if I just turn up 1, I have a simple kick drum going, and I'm generating that from VCO1 with a little bit of the VCO's envelope applied.
Which is basically, in this case, a pitch envelope.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have more of a higher attack and then a lower bass tail for the kick drum.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm using triangle waves so you can hear a little bit of the buzz of the harmonics with the filter fully open. So then I'm just using the filter to roll some of those off. And then I have a little bit of envelope applied to the filter
as well,
to open that back up. Another thing that I'm able to do is the noise signal inside that we have can also just be used to modulate the filter for a little bit of a crunchy texture.
Okay. So this is like super quick filter movement on a tiny scale, triggered by the noise.
Yeah, but what I can do is take another copy of our random signal, and if I feed that to the VCF mod, and then I'll set the Mother-32 to play again, and just turn it down. I can get some interesting adjustments to the dynamics as it plays, a little bit of modulation on the filter. And then one thing that I like to do is incorporate the second oscillator and then set the pitch row to just control the second oscillator and turn the frequency modulation up so that oscillator 1 is now modulating the frequency of oscillator 2. And I'm going to pull oscillator 1 out now. I can get these interesting textures out of oscillator 2 that I can mix in with oscillator 1. Get a nice mix of both of them. And then I can get some interesting movement happening there. One thing that I also like to do is I have two sequencer outputs for the Subharmonicon, and even though right now I have the sequencer selected as only having a range of 2 octaves, if I hold this button down until it blinks, it will make it so that the sequencer outputs are always spitting out a 10-volt range, which can be useful for things that require a 10-volt input and don't require pitch. So I can take my sequencer 2, which I have moving around here, and actually use that to modulate the level of the noise on the DFam. So now I can get some randomized noise bursts coming out of the signal. And one other thing that I love to do is take something like the trigger output from the Subharmonicon and feed it to the VCA, and I can generate things that sound like clicky hi-hats.
Nice how much variation has already going on now.
And then if I play with my velocity, I can start getting some pretty complex rhythms out of just a single synthesizer voice with some creative modulation.
Yeah, cool.
And then one last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set both the Subharmonicon waves to be square waves, and I'm going to use the triangle LFO on the Mother-32 to modulate the pulse width. But yeah, that's how I would build a patch from scratch. And so now that I've done that, I can spend a bit of time performing the patch for you.
Yeah, it sounds great.
I'll show you what that looks like.
In case you at home have any questions, feel free to let us know in the comments, and we'll get back to you eventually. And first of all, thanks for stepping by here at the studio.
Absolutely.
And now, we're gonna have you perform a bit with this Holy Trinity here
Cool.
for the rest of the video.
Wonderful.
All right. Cool.
Thank you.